Did you know that there is such a powerful African god, so enigmatic and wrapped in mystery that the church itself prefers to keep its name in silence? Have you ever wondered, what are you hiding from you? What if I tell you that there is a forbidden story, an ancestral secret that can completely change everything you believe about faith, salvation, and spirituality? Why no one talks about this god? Why do dominant religions seem to be afraid that you find out the truth? Perhaps because if you know the story behind this forgotten name, your vision of God and the Bible will never be the same. What do you know about the gods of ancient Africa? Very little, isn't it? This is exactly the intention. For centuries, powerful cultures full of spiritual wisdom were silenced and their gods relegated to oblivion as if they had never existed. But why so much fear? Why does the official story try to erase the footprints of this mysterious deity? Does it have a spiritual power that challenges the narratives we know? Many scholars claim that Africa is the cradle of humanity, and that, even before the great organized religions, there were already deep beliefs, sacred rituals, and a direct connection with the divine. Is this African god linked to such a strong truth that, if revealed, would the foundations of today's religions shake? Think to me, if you had a secret that could open your eyes to realities that are being hidden, would you have the courage to face this truth? This video is not for the weak of heart. We are talking about something that goes far beyond what is taught in the pulpits and religious books. It is a forbidden revelation, an old knowledge that, according to some, has been deliberately hidden so that you stay in the dark without question. And that's why this video can bother a lot of people. Are you ready to find out what don't want you to know? Imagine for a moment that there is a name, a symbol, a story that carries the power to unite the African past with biblical revelations. Something that perhaps the church never wanted you to hear because it could make you question everything, from the way we understand God to the very dogmas that were imposed over the centuries. If that's true, isn't it fair that you had a chance to know? This African god is not only lost in history, he was intentionally forgotten. And that raises an even more disturbing question. What is so dangerous in this deity? What does it represent that it is able to cause so much discomfort? We may be facing something that, if understood, can open a new dimension of faith, a connection with the spiritual that does not pass through the filters of human institutions and traditions. Can you feel the strength of these words? Can you understand how there is something inside you calling to find out more? This is not by chance. There is an hidden truth, an old knowledge that needs to be revealed. And I will tell you. Stay with me until the end of this video because you will understand why this god is so feared, why your name has been practically erased, and how it can change everything you believe. If you are prepared for a revelation that will mess with your mind and heart, leave a comment now saying, "I want to know the truth." In the next few minutes, we will enter a forbidden journey, a deep investigation that crosses the history, spirituality, and the most hidden secrets of humanity. But before following, I need to ask you, are you ready to know the lost African god that the church is scared to find out? If you have come here, that means something inside you has been awakened. This theme is too powerful to go unnoticed, so I want to know, what do you think about all this? Leave your comment right now and tell me if you had heard about this forgotten African god. Your opinion is essential, because each comment helps keep this conversation alive and makes more people discover these hidden truths. If this content is making you reflect and open your mind to something new, leave your like right now. It may seem small, but your like shows to YouTube that this video is important and needs to be delivered to more people who also seek answers. And if you are not yet part of our community, subscribe to the channel and activate the bell, so you won't miss any revelation that I bring here, and I can assure you that the next videos will surprise you even more. I count on you to spread this message. Each time you comment, enjoy, or subscribe, you are helping to take this truth beyond the imposed barriers. So tell me in the comments, Do you believe there are hidden secrets that can change the way we understand faith? Want me to continue the next IMO excerpt from the script, developing the introduction of the theme with historical facts and biblical connections, keeping this footprint of mystery and engagement? Have you ever wondered how many stories have been lost over time? How many traditions were erased, silenced, and replaced by narratives that shaped the faith of millions of people? African spirituality carries roots so deep that they cross generations, civilizations, and even beliefs we know today. There is an invisible link between the ancient gods of Africa and some mysteries that appear in the Bible itself, but almost no one talks about it. Is it coincidence, or is we facing something much greater? Something that, if revealed, shakes all that have taught us about God and the origin of faith. In ancient times, African peoples had an intimate relationship with the spiritual, a direct connection with higher forces. They did not see divinity as distant or inaccessible. For them, the divine was present in nature, in the elements, in the sun, the moon, in the waters, and even in the winds. This way of seeing the sacred reminds us, in a way, biblical passages that speak of God's presence throughout creation. Isn't it curious that such different cultures have such a close view of the divine presence? What few know is that in various African cultures, there is a belief in a supreme God, creator of everything, but there are also reports of intermediate deities. Just as in the Bible, we find angels and messengers of God. This resemblance raises a question. Did the ancient African traditions know spiritual truths that were drowned out or reinterpreted throughout history? Have you heard of the name Olodumare or Nzambi? They are names of deities venerated by African peoples who believed that he was the creator of heaven and earth, the great architect of the universe, a being above all and everyone. Isn't it intriguing to think that these concepts of a single God, so present in monotheistic religions, were already there long before the Bible came to the way we know today? What's more, do these gods, or lost African god, appear indirectly in Scripture, but simply not identified because they taught us to ignore everything that comes from ancient Africa? The Church, over the centuries, tried to standardize faith, erasing beliefs considered pagan or heretical. But what few people question is that many of these beliefs were not against God, only represented another way to connect with the divine. How many truths were hidden for fear of losing control? How many secrets remain buried because the spiritual power of this knowledge could free people from rigid dogmas? There are biblical passages, especially in the Old Testament, which speak of kings and peoples of other lands who worshipped different gods. Often, these reports are treated as idolatry or false beliefs. But is this the real vision, or just a narrative created to move us away from truths that didn't matter to certain religious leaders? When we read about Melchizedek, for example, a mysterious king and priest who served to the Most High God even before Abraham, is not clear from where his faith came from. Did he know something that the story wanted to erase? The most curious thing is that the Bible cites figures of African origin at crucial moments. Moses himself lived in Egypt, a land full of deities and spiritual wisdom. When we think of the wisdom of the wizards of Egypt, rituals, and the way they understood the supernatural, is it not possible that some of these knowledge was simply adapted over time? What if I told you that there is signs that a powerful African god is between the lines of the Bible, but so discreetly that only those who seek depth can you see? Imagine for a moment that all your life you believed to have the full image of God, but actually received only a fraction of this truth. Isn't that what may be happening? Perhaps, knowing more about this lost African god, you find out that the divine is even greater and deeper than what they taught us blindly. This is not a message against faith, but a message to make you think, question, and open your eyes to something that has always been around us, but many have tried to cover up. Some say that certain books have been removed from the Bible precisely because they brought accounts that could connect African traditions to the Christian faith. The book of Enoch, for example, talks about spiritual beings, fallen angels, and mysteries of heaven that relate directly to older cultures. Who guarantees that there is no invisible thread linking these stories? If the church really doesn't want you to know that, wouldn't that be the perfect reason for you to deepen? Because what is prohibited or hidden often is exactly what has the power to free. The question that remains is, do you have the courage to go further and face this truth? Every minute that passes, more pieces of this puzzle are being fitted. In the next few moments, we will further explore this connection between African traditions and the Bible, and you will understand why the name of this African god is still so feared. But before you follow, I want you to tell me, have you heard of some African god who has intrigued you? Write in the comments right now the word "I want to know more" for me to understand if you are really prepared to go to the end of this revelation. And if what you are hearing here makes sense, enjoy telling me in the comments which Bible passage makes you curious most, or if you have already felt something hidden behind the stories that told you. I want to know, because this journey only makes sense if we are together. Have you noticed how the official story is always told by those who have power? This is not only true for wars, achievements, or discoveries, but also for spirituality. Over the centuries, certain traditions have been suppressed, erased, or simply labeled as pagan, so that only one version of faith was kept alive. But why so much concern to erase certain names and stories? Is it because the truth they carry is too big to be ignored? There is something in this lost African god that can destabilize the belief system we know today, and perhaps that is why the church preferred to not talk about it. When we look at the historical records, we realize that many religions and cultures were forced to silence, to renounce their deities and practices so that Christianity would become the dominant religion. I'm not just talking about Africa, but from various parts of the world. However, in Africa, this process was even more intense because there were cultures very connected with spirituality, rituals that sought direct contact with the sacred, without intermediaries, without luxurious temples, without power systems. It was a faith that was born of the soul, contact with nature, observing the mysteries of life and death. And perhaps this was too dangerous for those who wanted to control the masses through fear and imposition. Why do you think so many elements of African spirituality have been demonized throughout history? Who decided that these rituals were evil or that these gods could not be worshipped? This is a question that bothers because the more we seek answers, the more we realize that the question was not about what is sacred or profane, but about control. The church, throughout the Middle Ages, has destroyed and silenced innumerable traditions, rewriting narratives to remain the only authorized voice over the divine. But what if part of God's truth was hidden precisely in these traditions that were suffocated? Imagine that a name, a symbol, or a story could show that spirituality is much larger and broader than we were taught. That there is not just one way, but various ways to connect with the Creator. That would put in every centuries of rigid doctrines, wouldn't it? Perhaps this is why this African god is so feared, because he represents a truth that does not depend on distorted institutions, dogmas, or interpretations. He is free, he is the pure essence of creation, and knowing this God means freeing the mind and heart of all that has been imposed. When we study the early centuries of Christianity, we realize that there was a real hunt for any knowledge that was not aligned with the official vision. Books were burned, cultures were decimated, and even texts that spoke of a more direct connection with God were eliminated from the Bible as we know it. Have you ever wondered why certain books, such as Enoch or apocryphal Gospels, have been removed? Wouldn't it be because they reveal truths that could open our eyes to something much bigger? In Africa, many priests and spiritual leaders kept knowledge that came from millennia, passed from generation to generation. They believed in divine forces that guided life, in powerful energies that could heal, protect, and bring wisdom. But with the colonization and imposition of European Christianity, these beliefs were ridiculed, persecuted, and even demonized. However, if we look carefully, we will see that many of these concepts approach the scriptures themselves. The idea of a supreme creative God, for example, is present in almost all ancient African cultures. Isn't that impressive? This is where the most uncomfortable question arises. Why was this African god out of official history? Wouldn't it be interesting that everyone knew that other cultures also spoke of a single God, creator of all things? Why don't we hear these stories in sermons, religious books, or cat classes exegeses? Perhaps because this truth would dismantle the narrative that only one tradition is legitimate, that only one people had direct contact with the divine. African spirituality shows that God reveals himself in many ways, and that he is not attached to specific borders, languages, or rituals. By understanding this, we started to question, was we told us all we should know? Or were we educated to accept only what was convenient to maintain power structures? These questions are not easy, but are necessary. They make us reflect on the true essence of faith. After all, if God is love, light, and truth, why would he be restricted to only one path imposed by force? Think about it. How many times have you felt that there was something missing in the explanations you gave you about the Bible? How many times have you had the feeling that there was something beyond words, something that pointed to a deeper knowledge? This feeling can be a call to search more, not only to accept the official version of things. I want you to stop a moment and reflect on it. What if the lost African God, the one that the church fears that you know, is an essential piece to understand where we have come from and where we are going spiritually? What if he is reminding us that true faith is not a set of cold rules, but a living and powerful connection with the sacred? This is just the beginning of what we have to explore. In the next few moments, we will dive even deeper, because there are hidden stories, hidden signs, and amazing connections between the Bible and these ancient African traditions. Before we continue, I want to know if you are with me in this search. Write in the comments the phrase, "I want the complete truth," to show that you are ready to continue this journey with me. And tell me, do you think the church has hid other truths like this? Comment below and go together to unravel what no one wants to tell. When we plunged into the ancient stories of Africa, we find references to such a great God that it seems to have been carefully erased from collective memory. This God is described as the supreme creator, the one who is above all the other deities and spiritual forces. He was not only a symbol of power, but also of love, justice, and wisdom, something very close to the qualities attributed to the God of the Bible. Some call him Olodumare, others Nzambi, and in some traditions he is revered as the one who maintains the balance of the universe and sustains the whole creation. It is as if this name echoes the same spiritual truths we find in Genesis, when we read about the God who created the heavens and the earth, but with a perspective that was born from the soul of a people deeply connected with the essence of life. Olodumare, for example, was seen as the God who did not need to be represented by images because he was in everything. He was the force that moved the winds, the light that warmed the world, the energy present in the cycle of nature. It is not curious to realize how this vision is approaching what we read in the Bible, when Paul speaks of Acts 17:28, "Why do we live and move and exist?" Isn't it possible that there is a meeting point between these traditions? Something that shows us that, long before religions organized as we know today, was there a common truth shared by humanity? And the most impressive is that this African god did not require complex rituals or elaborate sacrifices. He was accessible through sincere prayer, respect for nature, the search for justice and harmony. It was a God who saw the heart, who understood the pain of the human being and offered protection. This image brings us to Christ himself, which has taught us that God is not only in temples, but in spirit and truth, that he looks at what is within us, not just appearances. Many biblical prophets, such as Isaiah and Jeremiah, spoke of a God who abhors hypocrisy, who does not accept empty rituals when the heart is distant. This same essence can be found in the teachings attributed to Olodumare or Nzambi. Is it not intriguing to think that so far distant cultures geographically and historically had such similar perceptions about the Creator? Are we not facing proof that there is a universal truth, a God who has revealed himself to all peoples in different ways, but with the same love and power? This forgotten African God was also seen as the holder of all wisdom. He not only created the world, but has placed in him spiritual laws that govern life, laws that resemble those we find in the Holy Scriptures. The idea that all man plants, he reaps, for example, is present in both the Bible and in African traditions. The concept that good attracts blessings and injustice has consequences is engraved on both systems of faith. This similarity cannot just be coincidence. Is it possible that we are facing a great spiritual conspiracy? Perhaps the fear of the church to mention this God is not just because it is different, but because it is so similar. Because he shows that spirituality does not belong to a single religion or institution, but is spread throughout all cultures, as a reflection of God himself, who is infinite and unlimited. This changes everything, because it makes us realize that divine truth is not restricted to one way, but manifests itself in different languages, symbols, and stories. Have you ever imagined what would happen if more people found that there is such a deep link between African traditions and the Bible? How many people would start to question the official versions that have been delivered to us? How many would open their eyes to a spirituality that transcends the limits imposed by history? Perhaps that is exactly why they prefer to erase the name of Olodumare, Nzambi, and other African gods who spoke about a single creator. It is easier to keep people stuck with a unique narrative than to allow them to explore other ways that lead to the same true God. When we study biblical prophecies, we realize that they often speak of peoples and nations that would be called back to the knowledge of the Lord. Isn't at any level, these words also point to the rediscovery of old truths? The very book of Isaiah says that God would call the peoples of all nations, including those who were forgotten, to know their glory. What if it comes from this call is it precisely to open your eyes to these connections between Africa and the Christian faith? There is something within each of us who feels when a truth is revealed. Perhaps you are feeling this now, as if something in your spirit was awakening to a new understanding. This is not by chance. This is the power of spiritual knowledge, to discover that there are more hidden things than we were allowed to know. Think about it. If God revealed himself to the Hebrews, why wouldn't the Africans reveal himself? Why would he choose to speak only with one people and ignore others? The Bible itself says that God has created all the nations of one man, and that he wants everyone to know him. So it makes perfect sense to believe that these African traditions not only knew the Creator, but they have also honored him in ways we may not completely understand. I want you to reflect on this now. Are we not facing a great opportunity to reconnect the pieces of spiritual history that have been lost? Isn't it time to seek to understand these origins so that we can have a more complete and true faith? If this makes sense to you, write in the comments, "I want to find out this God." I want to know who is really willing to continue this journey with me. And tell me too if you have already felt that there is something beyond what they told us. If you have already been feeling that there are secrets hidden in the Bible and spiritual traditions. Leave your comment and share what is going on in your mind now, because your participation is fundamental to keep unraveling these revelations together. When we begin to investigate the connections between African spirituality and Scripture, we find surprising signs that cannot simply be ignored. There are fragments of ancient texts, oral traditions, and even reports of travelers and scholars who reveal the existence of a deep spiritual knowledge in Africa long before any colonization or religious imposition. It is as if there is an invisible line connecting the Creator who appears in the Bible to the supreme God venerated by the African peoples. This line, despite being purposely erased from the official narrative, can still be perceived by those who have alert eyes and thirst for answers. If we look carefully, the Bible itself recognizes the presence of wisdom and God's power in other peoples. A clear example of this is the figure of Melchizedek, the king sleeping, mentioned in Genesis 14:18, who was a priest of the Most High God long before Abraham was called. Who was, after all, this mysterious priest who served the same God? Why does the Bible mention it with so much respect, but does not explain where its spiritual knowledge came from? Some scholars believe that Melchizedek may have come from an older spiritual tradition, perhaps even with links to African wisdom. Another example is Moses himself, created in Egypt, a land rich in spiritual mysteries and ancestral knowledge. Moses, educated in the house of Pharaoh, certainly had access to the teachings of the Egyptian sages, who saw the creation as the work of a supreme deity. It is no coincidence that the narrative of creation in Genesis has parallels with African myths and the Middle East, all talking about a unique and omnipotent creative force. This leads us to question if, barring cultural differences, there is the same God manifesting itself in different ways, adapted to the understanding of each people. When we analyze passages such as Isaiah 19:25, which declares, "Blessed be Egypt my people, and Assyria work of my hands, and Israel my inheritance," we realize that God recognizes nations beyond Israel as part of his plan. This includes African regions such as Egypt and Ethiopia, cited several times in the Bible as lands of great spiritual importance. In the book of Jeremiah 13:23, there is even mention of the Ethiopian, and in Amos 9:7, God asks, "You are not for me as the children of the Ethiopians, O children of Israel?" Why are these passages so little commented on the pulpits? Perhaps because they show that God has always been in connection with all peoples, not just a specific group. African traditions, especially those who worshipped Olodumare or Nanzambi, speak of a God who has no physical form, an invisible and almighty being. It remembers John 4:24, where Jesus says, "God is spirit, and those who worship him worship in spirit and in truth must be worshipped." Are we not facing the same truth expressed differently? If we stop to think, even the concept of Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, can find parallels in ancient African cultures where divinity was seen as a multiple force but united in the same creative power. Another proof of connection is in the presence of African characters at crucial moments of biblical history. Simon Cyrenius, for example, who helped Jesus carry the cross, Mark 15:21, was African from Cyrene, a region of present-day Libya. This shows us that Africa was not on the sidelines of the history of salvation, but it was part of it. When the Ethiopian eunuch is baptized by Philip in Acts 8 verses 27 through 39, we clearly see that the gospel reaches Africa from the early days of the early church. Why is the history of African faith so forgotten today? It is also fascinating to realize that Psalms and Proverbs, full of teachings about justice, righteousness, and wisdom, have many similarities to African proverbs and dictations that have gone from generation to generation. Both talk about the importance of humility, gratitude, fear of God, and respect for others. This cannot be a coincidence. It is as if God had planted the same message in the heart of different peoples, so that in different times everyone could recognize their voice. If we go even deeper, some biblical passages seem to bring veiled clues about old traditions. In Psalm 68:31, for example, it is written, "Princes will come from Egypt. Ethiopia will run to extend hands to God." This phrase seems to indicate that the African nations would play an important role in recognizing divine power. It is possible that these words are pointing to something that many have not yet understood. African faith, in their roots, has much more to do with the true God than we were led to believe. The big question is, if there are so many connections, why was this knowledge set aside? Is the reason we have already argued? The fear that people realize that God is not restricted to a single religious system? Because if we understand that the Creator has already revealed to all peoples, there is no more room for spiritual hierarchies or mass control through fear. I know this subject stirs a lot of people. You may be there, listening to these words, and something inside you are making sense, as if remembering something that has always been hidden. This is not by chance. Truth has this power. It awakens the soul. And I want you to tell me in the comments if this is happening to you now. Write the word "I feel this truth" if you are also realizing these connections that almost no one speaks. Also, I want to ask you, did you already know these verses and references about the African presence in the Bible? Have you ever thought that perhaps the forgotten African God could be much closer to the biblical God than we imagined? Write your opinion, because this conversation is essential for more people to wake up and seek the truth that has been hidden for centuries. Have you ever wondered why certain issues are never openly spoken in the churches? Why is there an almost absolute silence when it comes to spiritual deities and traditions that are not aligned with the official narrative? It is as if there is a collective fear of moving a secret that could completely change the way we understand God, the Bible, and spirituality. The truth is that many religious leaders prefer that you continue to accept only what they choose to tell, because this control ensures power, followers, and a solid structure that cannot be questioned. But isn't there something much deeper behind it? Doesn't they want us to continue in the dark? Believe I'm only in a limited version of the truth. When we talk about a lost African God, a creator who existed in the memory of the peoples even before the arrival of Christianity, we are playing at an extremely delicate point. This is because admitting that African spirituality carries truths about the divine would be equivalent to recognizing that God's message is much more universal and ancient than what is in religious books. This would dismantle the idea of exclusivity, break religious hierarchies, and place each individual face to face with the possibility of connecting directly with the Creator without intermediaries. And do you know what happens when people find out that they can find God without depending on institutions? The control simply ends. For centuries, faith was used as an instrument of power. Kings, priests, and spiritual authorities dictated the rules, and those who did not obey were considered a heretic or enemy of God. But if we observe the story, we will see that many of these rules had nothing to do with true divine teaching. They were created to keep the people on the line, to shape behaviors and impose fear. Now imagine the impact of finding that other cultures already had contact with the true God, the same Creator described in the Bible, long before organized religions exist. Imagine realizing that African spirituality, with all its richness of symbols and meanings, may be pointing to the same essence of love, justice, and power that Christianity says to preach. Do you think those who benefit from this control would be interested in publicizing something like this? Often you hear stories about how African traditions have been demonized. Everything that was not part of the official narrative was called magic, witchcraft, or idolatry. But was that really? Or were these practices just being eliminated because they carried spiritual power that could not be manipulated? When we think of the force of cultures that honored nature, which saw the divine in every detail of life, we begin to realize that there was something very powerful there. Something that could teach us that God is not attached to temple walls or the interpretation of a minority, but present throughout the universe, accessible to those seeking with a sincere heart. This fear of losing power is not new. The Church's own history is full of times when books were destroyed, knowledge was censored, and spiritual leaders were persecuted simply because they think differently. Have you ever wondered why so many texts considered apocrypha were taken from the official Bible? Did not these writings bring information that could reveal a much broader and more universal spirituality? Perhaps these texts would talk about a divine connection that transcends borders, a connection that was also known as African peoples and therefore had to be erased. If you observe, even the figure of Jesus has, over time, shaped to serve the interests of religious institutions. Jesus, in his time, did not preach religion, preached liberation. He said that the kingdom of God is within us and that we do not need mediators to connect with the Father. Now, think to me, what would happen if everyone understood this? If everyone knew they can seek God directly, without fear and without manipulation? This would be a threat to those who built empires based on strict dogmas and interpretations. The same goes for African spirituality. When we look at gods like Olodumare or Nzambi, we realize that these cultures have always believed in a unique, invisible, and powerful creator, much like the biblical God. However, they prefer to turn these deities into something forbidden, associating them with evil practices when they actually carry teachings that could approach the Creator. Was this not done purposefully so that no one questioned the versions imposed by the force? Is the fear of losing authority exactly why this African god was thrown into the darkness of history? Maybe it's time to open your eyes to realize that there are more hidden things than we can imagine. Perhaps the biggest secret is not just who this forgotten god is, but why do you want so much that you don't find out about him? The question that remains is, do you prefer to continue believing only what you told you, or are you willing to seek the truth on your own? Do you have the courage to dive deeper and face the possibility that spirituality is much greater than we imagine? I know this may seem challenging to some, but it is exactly this search that transforms our faith. When we open ourselves to investigate, question, and understand, we are no longer mere spectators and we become seekers of truth. And that's what I want to go so. I want you to tell me in the comments if this message is playing something inside you. Right now, I want to see the truth if you feel that there is something hidden behind the official story. And I want to know your opinion. Do you think religious leaders really hide certain truths to keep control? Have you ever felt that there was something missing in the teachings you received? Write in the comments, share what you think, because this is what keeps this conversation alive and helps us go deeper and deeper on this discovery journey. Have you ever wondered why certain subjects simply disappear from the official story? Why are certain spiritual knowledge treated as taboo, as if it were too dangerous to even mention them? It is as if there is an invisible barrier preventing people from knowing certain truths. When we talk about the lost African god, a creator who has been worshipped by ancient civilizations and has characteristics so close to the biblical God, we touch something that stirs the power structures that control religious narrative. And this is perhaps the main reason for the church's fear. The possibility that people woke up to a truth that does not need to be intermediated by institutions. Do you want us to continue in the dark? For centuries, organized religion has built an authority system based on knowledge control. Only priests and religious leaders had access to scripture, and theirs were the function of interpreting and teaching what was right to believe. But what would happen if everyone knew that the divine is greater than any dogma? That God has always been revealed to all peoples, including Africans, long before the arrival of Christianity. This would collapse the idea of exclusivity and could free millions of people from fear and manipulation. Isn't that why many leaders prefer to hide these stories? There is also a delicate historical issue. Africa has always been seen as a territory of wealth and wisdom, but has been systematically exploited and subdued. When the colonizers arrived, not only took the land and resources, but also attacked local beliefs and traditions, classifying them as pagan or demonic. But if these beliefs were recognized as legitimate manifestations of the Creator, it would be impossible to justify the destruction of entire cultures. Thus, rewriting history and erasing the African god was a way of maintaining dominion, not only physical but also spiritual. Think about it. Why do so many official religions avoid studying or talking about African deities? Is it because there is a real fear that by exploring this subject, people realize that there is not just a way to connect with God? Jesus himself said in John 10:16, "I still have other sheep that are not of this fold. It is also appropriate to add these, and they will hear my voice, and there will be a flock and a shepherd." This passage suggests that God's plan is much larger than a single group or culture. So why is this idea so little commented? Some theories say that throughout history, there has been a deliberate effort to control spiritual narrative. This includes the choice of books that would be part of the Bible, the censorship of writings considered dangerous, and the destruction of traditions that could offer a different view of the divine. It is no coincidence that so many apocryphal books have been left out of the official scriptures. Perhaps these texts contain fragments of truths that connect Christianity with ancient African traditions that could reveal a more complete and more free spirituality. When we look at the teachings of Jesus, we realize that he did not preach fear or manipulation, but freedom and love. He said that the kingdom of God is within us, not in temples or institutions. However, over the centuries, this message has been distorted to keep people dependent on religious authorities. Now imagine if everyone understands that they can connect directly with God without the need for mediators. Imagine what would happen if people knew that the lost African God also speaks of a unique creator, present and accessible to all. This would be a real threat to those who built power over religious exclusivity. Another important point is that African spirituality profoundly values nature, community life, and connection with the universe. These are principles that echo in the words of Jesus and the prophets, but rarely value as they should. Why will it be? Perhaps because these values reinforce the idea that we are all part of something much larger, that we do not need religious divisions or rivalries to live a full spiritual life. This, of course, is not convenient for those who profit from separation and fear. Have you ever felt that there is something off in the explanations that give us about faith? How many times have you had the impression that there are hidden answers, as if we were just scratching the surface of true spirituality? Perhaps this feeling is a call, a sign that it is time to seek the truths that have been erased from history. Because, deep down, it seems that what is considered forbidden is often what has the greatest power to free us. When I talk about this lost African God, I am not here to attack any belief, but to open a door of reflection. I want you to ask yourself, why did these stories never come to us? Who benefits from our spiritual ignorance? What if the true connection with God didn't depend on temples, expensive rituals, or institutions, but only on the sincerity of our hearts? It changes everything, isn't it? If this reflection is making you think, I want you to tell me in the comments. Write, I don't want to stay in the dark, to show that you are awake and want to keep exploring these hidden truths. And tell me too, do you believe there are spiritual secrets being hidden so that people do not discover their true strength? I want to see your opinion, because this dialogue is what makes all this journey worthwhile. When we stop to reflect on everything we have already said so far, we realize that this discovery is not only historical or cultural, but deeply spiritual. If we recognize that there is a lost African God so close to the Creator we know by the Bible, it changes the way we understand not only God, but also our own relationship with Him. How many times have you been thinking that your faith is distant, heavy, full of rules and fears? And if I tell you that this revelation shows just the opposite, that God always wanted to be close to you, that He always spoke through different peoples, cultures, and times, and that true spirituality has never been restricted to a single group, this discovery invites us to see God in a broader, more alive, closer way. The truth is that most people grow with a limited view of who God is. We are taught to believe that it only manifests itself within certain traditions or within temples' walls. But as we study these signs, we realize that God is everywhere. He is the source of all life and the essence of all creation. When we look at ancient African cultures and see how they understood the Creator as part of everything, of wind, of water, of light, the human heart, it reminds us of passages like Romans 1:20, which says that the invisible attributes of God, His eternal power and His divinity, have been clearly seen since the creation of the world. It is as if these cultures were witnessing the same truth that Paul described. God is present in all that exists. This perception changes our faith because it takes us out of superficiality. How many times does people's faith become just a list of obligations? It is as if we are always trying to please a distant God when, in fact, He has always been closer than we imagined. The discovery of this African god makes us realize that true spirituality is not about fear or punishment, but about connection, about being aware of the divine presence in everything we do. This challenges us to live more in full way, to see the sacred in simple things, and to understand that each choice of ours is a way of connecting us or pushing us from this creative force. Have you ever thought about the impact this can have on your life? Understanding that God is not limited to a single religious system, but that He speaks to all peoples, we begin to see that no one is out of the reach of divine grace. This brings a sense of freedom and, at the same time, responsibility. Freedom because we realize that we do not need intermediaries to seek God. Responsibility because we understand that in knowing this, we are called to live more consciously, more lovingly, more spiritual. Also, this discovery makes us question everything we have been imposed on. If God has always revealed Himself in so many ways, why accept without question that only one version of faith is valid? This does not mean abandoning its belief, but deepening it, going beyond what is superficial. Imagine how much your life can be transformed by understanding that you can talk to God anywhere, anytime, without needing complicated rituals or fears. This is liberating. And that is precisely what power systems fear: spiritually free people. Another profound change that this truth brings is in the way we look at the differences. For centuries, religions divided more than they united. But by recognizing that the forgotten African god speaks of the same creator as the Bible reveals, we understand that cultural differences are only distinct languages to expose. This is the same divine essence. This generates respect, humility, and a sense of unity. Jesus said in John 4:23 that the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth. This is a message that echoes in African traditions, no matter the shape, but the sincerity of the heart. If this discovery spreads, it can transform not only individuals, but whole communities. Imagine people understanding that the sacred is in every act of kindness, that faith is something alive, present in every gesture of compassion. Imagine families rediscovering spirituality as an experience of connection and not as a weight. This can cure deep wounds caused by fear and guilt that are often used to control the faithful. And now I want you to think, how does it change your way of seeing God? How does the way you see yourself? Because understanding that the Creator is in everything and that He reveals Himself to all makes us realize that we are part of something much greater. We are not just spectators of history. We are part of a great spiritual narrative that began long before we are born and will continue much later. And that brings a huge sense of purpose. Have you ever felt that your faith needed something deeper? Something that would make you feel this presence in a real way? Maybe that's what is happening now. Your spirit is recognizing a truth that was dormant within you. And I want you to tell me in the comments if you feel this change happening. Write, "I feel the presence of God," if you are realizing that this revelation is making you see everything from a new form. Also tell me, do you believe that God may have spoken in different ways to other peoples, but always with the same essence? I really want to hear your opinion. And if this video is touching your heart, share it with someone you love, because this message may be exactly what this person needs to listen to today. If you stayed with me until the end of this video, it is because something inside you is looking for the truth, and it already shows that you are part of a special group of people who are not content with the superficial. So before I leave, I want to ask you 3 simple things, but they make all the difference. First, subscribe now to the channel and activate the bell so you don't miss any powerful revelation that is coming. Second, leave your like to show YouTube that this content is important and needs to reach more people who, like you, want to know hidden truths. And lastly, comments down here the phrase, "I came to the end because I seek the truth," so that I know that you are someone who goes to the last second to learn something new. And don't stop here, because the next video that is appearing on your screen will take you even deeper into this mystery. Click now and continue this journey with me. I assure you, you won't regret it.